Hello everybody, welcome to After the Bell. I am Dylan Weaver. I am a sophomore at OJ Roberts High School, and this is...
I'm Mr. Yoder. I've been teaching at OJ for the last 17 years, doing world language, and recently I've been helping the Flintstones meet the Jetsons, helping the teachers better integrate technology. And one of my passion projects last year was to develop a tech pack, a student-run tech team, called ourselves TPAC for short, which was technology to promote academic collaboration. And I asked all the kids who joined, we had about 40 members, to come with a passion project or something they wanted to work on. And so this podcast became sort of the brainchild of Dylan and myself. And so now we're welcoming you to our inaugural episode where we chit chat with different teachers and other people around the building about what's going on in education right now and just have some real talk, because that's something that sometimes students and teachers don't do enough of together. So our first episode is actually a teacher of Dylan's last year that we always kept talking about. Do you want to intro her a little bit to them?
Yes, so we talk a lot about our education and what we like, what we don't like, and Mrs. Frasca, who is our first guest, kept coming up because she does amazing things in the classroom. She's only been teaching in the United States for 3 years, and one of her 3 years was during the pandemic. So the fact that she is doing what she's doing during the time that she's doing it is phenomenal. She is absolutely amazing with technology. She's great with students. She helps everyone out with their, not just teaching them Spanish, but also in their everyday lives. So she's an absolutely phenomenal teacher, and you guys are going to absolutely love what she has to say.
Yeah, and so today's episode was really a lot of SEL, social emotional learning, which is a big buzzword in education. But today you're going to hear some real talk about that as the three of us just kind of rapped about, things that we're seeing in education, things that we remember from when we were in school, and what are some things that are going on. So we really hope you like the episode. We hope you subscribe and like and keep following us, because we'll be cranking them out for you. So thanks for tuning in to After the Bell. Well, I am so glad we're here today.
I'm excited.
Yeah, this is cool. So this is sort of, Dylan had pitched this idea because he and I often just chat, and it just takes off, and it's usually really cool stuff. And then we thought we should, take some time to invite other people, and oftentimes you came up last year.
I have good things.
So,
Yes.
obviously we're excited to have Ms. Frasca here. Do you want to talk a little bit about how long you've been teaching? Tell us a little bit about, because I don't even know that I know too much about it.
So this is my 3rd year teaching in America. But before that, I taught for about 5 years in Spain. I taught English. And first I lived in Madrid, and then I moved to Salamanca and started teaching English there. So that was a lot of fun. And my last year in Spain, I started grad school to get my cert to teach here in America.
Wow.
So this is my 2nd year at OJ, 3rd year overall. The 3 craziest years.
I honestly, I spent so much time in Spain trying to figure out how to stay there to do that job.
Yes.
I just couldn't get it.
Oh,
So
I did not
exciting.
make that much money.
Well, no, and it wasn't. I didn't care
Yeah.
about that, but if I could just have a reason to stay, to have a
Right.
visa, because I think you would agree that the lifestyle is very.
So different.
Have you ever
I
traveled
lost-
abroad?
I have been to the Bahamas on a cruise, so not really.
Okay.
But
Kind of
I
doesn't
did
count.
have Miss Frasca in class, and I do know that she is an absolutely phenomenal teacher. And when I say she is a pioneer and on the forefront of education, I do not mean that lightly. Everything that she does in class, we both agree is great. We love everything. The way she uses technology, the way she talks with kids, interacts with kids, just the humility she brings to the classroom. Absolutely phenomenal, and we love her. This is why we decided to have her as our first on our pilot episode. So.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
And I think too, when you experience life in a different culture like that, and
Right.
it moves at a different pace, and
Totally.
priorities are different, I think that helps, because then you can't help but bring that with you.
Yeah.
And I know I felt the same way. I did a study abroad in the summer once where I stayed in Madrid and helped students who were there living in homestays.
Yes.
And I felt like when I came back after that, I was just different. So
Totally.
my teaching was different, even though I'd been teaching for maybe 10 years at that point. I was different, So I can appreciate that, which I think is because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring the world to you,
Yeah.
Right.
so that
Yeah.
later on, when you go to the world, you feel like you know it, or
Right.
you've been there, or
Exactly. Because, I had 12 years of Spanish before I went and lived in Spain.
Yeah.
And those first 3 months, I was like, oh my gosh, I know nothing. I felt like I knew nothing.
Yep.
Exactly.
After 12 years.
Exactly.
So it's hard. It's difficult to bring that back in a way that's meaningful.
Yeah, because I think you understand the constraint that's put against you, like as a teacher trying
Right.
to teach you guys Spanish. You realize, like, you know, when I was over there for that program, it was 24/7. Everything was in
Right.
Spanish. They were living with a Spanish family,
Yeah.
and then we do it in a 45-minute block,
It's
Right.
not
and
enough.
23 hours and 15 minutes go by,
And you
until-
don't go out and you don't use it. Like unless you
Right.
go out and you live with a Spanish speaking community and
Yeah.
you live in that area and you don't actually use it. So you're not applying it. You're
Yeah.
like you say all the time. You don't teach Spanish like you teach math.
Yeah,
You can't
Right.
and
you
that's
have
the
to
problem.
apply it.
And I think that's how I think it's just so easy, like with anything in life. People want it in a box, they want it digestible.
Right.
And for your average teacher who might also be a parent and doing other things, you want it simple. You want it in a box, you want it something you can digest. Just like that's probably the issue we have right now with news and politics and everything else, is we want everything to be simple,
Oh, totally.
but it's much more than it is. Well, that's actually good, because one of the first things we wanted to talk about today was, obviously last year and even the second half of the year prior to that was very, very different. So first thing I wanted to talk about is like, what surprised you about last year, but in regards to something that maybe went better than you had anticipated it going? What do you think, Dylan? What was something for you
For me?
that surprised you about last year in a good way?
I think the online schooling, the way
Right.
we bounced back, because the last few months that we had of my 8th grade
Yeah.
were thrown
Oh my
together.
gosh.
It was duct tape on the
Oh,
side
yeah.
of the boat.
That's exactly right.
It was not anything special. But what O&J Roberts was able to pull off was impressive to me, because they were able to do a full online class that was just as good or better than what we do normally. So I felt that was probably the most positive thing that we were able to accomplish at OJR. So
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of students felt that way, and teachers, that was like, you didn't have like the kid that's always like disrupting the class, or you could put him on mute, or he wasn't
yeah.
showing up, or so then you were getting like a solid lesson or a solid lecture without
Right.
the interruption
Yeah.
that typically would happen when you're in person,
That's kind of true.
which I think a lot of teachers are like, oh, it's kind of nice to not have classroom management get in the
Oh,
way
yeah.
of what we were doing, because you could just be like, boop, you're
Yeah.
gone. You know,
A
it's
whole
like,
different ball game. That's true.
yeah.
I think for me, I was really worried going into last year, thinking I'm not going to be able to get a relationship with these kids. Like I was so nervous, like, oh my gosh, I am going to have these kids on a screen and they're going to be like, well, I'm home and I'm just going to listen and do my own thing. And I was really nervous. And then I guess because I overcompensated so much, or I was so focused on it, I know all of my kids from last year more than I've known kids from when I had them in person, because we just made it such a priority.
Yeah.
I think Dylan was online all last year. I think
yeah.
you could see that we made a family even though we weren't together. And that was a really nice surprise, because that's something that I was really nervous about.
Yeah, I think that was something that rung true, that when he and I were talking a lot,
Yeah.
that it always kind of came back to
Right.
that. And what would you say were some ways that helped you make those connections? Were there anything in particular you were doing
Yeah.
that maybe you hadn't done before that helped you make those connections?
Yeah, so a big one was not being afraid to push content aside for a few minutes and just focus on talking to each other. So we started every day with a ridiculous question about something. We argued whether cereal was a soup or not.
Yeah.
We talked about what your walk-in song would be, like your background music, just things every single day. And it made a huge difference, because then your personality comes out, even if you're online. And it really worked. So we took time to make sure. There were days where my students had questions about things that had nothing to do with Spanish. And we took time to answer them and talk about them. And so it was, I guess, because the year was so different and we kind of knew it was like, all right, well, we have no idea what's coming out of next year, that we could take the time, because we're like, okay, well, there's
Yeah.
going to be kind of spaces open.
I think Dylan got COVID. Are you okay, Dylan? Go get a drink of water. I was like, I think Dylan.
It's the year of crazy.
Isn't it funny how people cough now and you're just like,
Oh, I know, so scared.
what's happening? There's something happening.
Or he's experiencing what we as teachers experience when we're like, oh, the Zoom's not working and we're trying to get it to hook up to the da-da-da-da-da. You have to
Well, it's funny, when you mentioned before about the overcompensation, it made me think about when I was learning Spanish and I couldn't roll my R's. For the longest
Oh,
time,
yeah.
I couldn't do it. And so when I was in Spain studying college every day, I'd stay after and do tongue twisters.
Yeah.
Back good. And and then finally it hit for me, and I got there, but now I can't stop rolling my R's.
Right.
So like in a scenario where like, you know, it's the middle of a word and it's one R, so like instead of saying the word but, I'm saying the word dog. You know,
right.
like, so and it's just like that, like I just because of that, because that's what happens, you know, we overcompensate on something and we achieve our goal, but
right.
you know, sometimes, but that's cool. So I think utilizing those opportunities. So now that you're back with us, we're happy.
That's my bad.
We're happy you're back.
I don't know what's happening there.
Soup or is cereal a soup?
Oh my goodness.
What would you
I
take
think
on that?
we said yeah, it was.
Okay.
We thought it was.
Every
was
class
different.
had a different whatever. And they like posted on their Instagram, did a poll, everything.
Yeah, they did.
My opinion is that it is a soup based on the definition of what a soup is.
Yes. We did
Depends
that
on
with
who you ask.
a hot dog is a sandwich. We
Right,
did
like
that
hot
too.
dog sandwich. Then we got into the whole, but what that created was a space in which we all had a voice. And so I don't actually think we lost any content.
No.
Everyone
think we
spoke
did, yeah.
Spanish by the end because that's what we took time to know each other, and therefore our time and content was more meaningful.
It was.
Because it was more focused, because we liked each other, because there was a relationship there.
Yeah.
That's a cliche in education, like have a relationship with your kids. But no, seriously.
Yeah.
Have a real relationship with your kids.
Yeah, well, and also I don't know if you remember this, but I know that you, every like week or so, you'd be like, hey, can you like tell me something about yourself, or do you have any questions about anything in life?
Yeah.
Are you having any problems?
Yeah.
Anything at all, and you could come to her and you could ask.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really important thing, because some teachers, they take this job as just a regular 9 to 5, and it's
Right.
not. You can't think of teaching as a regular 9 to 5, because you're not just a
Right.
construction worker hammering the nails.
Right.
You are teaching the future of our country, of our world. Like, you influence so much more than you actually realize as a teacher, as an educator, that you can't even see. Like, you don't know how much you can touch a kid, and then he goes on to be this big successful businessman, cure cancer, do whatever.
Yeah.
And all you did was ask how his day was.
Right.
And it's so impactful that you don't even realize how big the scope of what you're doing is. That's why I say that you are on the forefront, that you are a pioneer in education, because I have no other teacher that does that.
Right.
Well,
I
I
have not had a single one.
think too, because okay, so when people ask me like why I got into teaching, I always said it was to take away a job from the bad teachers I had. That's what I used to say.
Yeah.
However, I've since changed my mind. You know, now this is my 17th year teaching, and I've known since 6th grade that I wanted to be a teacher. So, you know, but I can understand the constraint, like, you know, talking about like the issues of like, you know, there's so much constraint that happens that I think sometimes like you can't help but get fatigued. And, you know, like teachers,
Sure.
you know, even though, okay, yeah, we have summers off, but like your average teacher is spending 10 to 12 hours a day sometimes
Right.
on schoolwork, but they're only on the clock technically for 7 hours. So like they're giving an extra 5 hours to grading, to lesson prep, to all of this other stuff. And I think it fatigues them. And because of all that extra stuff, then they get in the classroom. Well, they still had a family to take care of. They still had all
Right.
these other things. So I think what happens is like, you know, it gets lost in all of that. And so what I think the best thing I ever saw, there's a woman named Holly Woodard who teaches at Central Bucks, and she
That's
is.
where I saw it my first year.
Oh, did you?
Mhm.
This woman is amazing. So she just did wrote a book on flex teaching and how to teach in that environment. And one of the lessons that she had like 10 hacks, and one of them was like setting protocols and procedures in the classroom. So like that way everybody knew what to expect and the teacher wasn't like the judge, jury, and executioner. But one of the things she did in one of her workshops and in her book was she talked about how to balance her checkbook of her time so that she wasn't taking
Yes.
stuff home, because that's what I think happens. So so my philosophy is the teachers that I had that I said were not good teachers, or the teachers who maybe sometimes you feel like are that way, I think what happens is they don't balance that checkbook well.
No.
And then what
Right.
happens is they get so overloaded with the extra stuff that it gets in the way and it clouds them, and then they can't come in and have that fresh start.
Yeah.
And I think there's something there that's like, the average teacher, I think, we need to learn how to better balance our budget so that we don't spend too much of ourselves. Because that's what happened to me last year. In all honesty, like the year before and ever, I'm helping 1,800 students, 160 faculty. So on March 13th, when we shut down, I all of a sudden had to come up with an attendance system, how to use Canvas, how to enroll all these kids in it. And like I don't even know when days started and ended.
Yeah.
I don't even think I had a sleep cycle. I was living and working in the same space, which was really weird because then I had my 2 daughters and my mom lives with us. And like when you have all of those things at play, it's hard to set healthy boundaries. Right. So like emails, like I hate like people emailing after like 5 or 6 o'clock. That's got to stop being a thing. Seriously, like if you're sending an email, use the schedule send and send it during normal business hours. If this was Europe, you'd get fined or like your boss would come talk to you because we're not setting healthy boundaries, and that's what happens because then they get spent and then they don't have any currency or to come into the classroom.
That is,
you know what I mean? So I wonder how much of it is that. Because I think that's one of the things. Well, let's segue a little here.
Well, I think you brought in a bunch of the questions in that.
Yeah.
In summation, we're trying to talk about, first of all, how the pandemic changed things. So on top of already not being able to balance our checkbooks properly, you've got a pandemic. And no one ever taught like this ever before in the history of ever.
No.
So you have that against you as well. But I think you're right. What needs to change in education, or we're talking about being pioneers, or on the frontier, what needs to be changing in education is what we're prioritizing and what matters in the classroom and what really needs to be thrown away or for another day.
That is the biggest thing with me is there are certain things that I feel need to be prioritized in a classroom. And not just making an effort to not really get to know your students because you're gonna have thousands, so you're not gonna remember all of them, but to at least make an effort to make sure that they're okay at home and all of that. But there's lots of things that we don't need to do.
Right.
Like I don't need to know a lot of biology, a lot of this science, social studies, math. I'm not gonna really need it. And I understand you have the curriculum, you have to teach that. That's not on the teachers, that's on the policymakers and the people who make our curriculum.
You've just killed all of our science teachers. They've stopped watching at this
for
point.
his personal life.
I understand some kids might love biology, they might love chemistry, they want to be a chemist, they want to be a biologist. Great, make that an extracurricular thing. Put the life skills first. My brother got out of high school 2 years ago, right before the pandemic. He graduated 2020, right? He didn't know how, if it weren't for my mom and my dad, he would not know how to cook. He doesn't know how to do laundry. He can't fold a fitted sheet. He can't do taxes. He doesn't know anything about insurance. He barely knows how to vote. Like,
well, now some of those are on your parents. Like some of those things
some of them
are on your parents.
But I remember in kindergarten and first grade up till probably about 3rd grade, it was all about learning life skills. Kindergarten, your main thing, spelling your name, tying your shoes. Yeah. That was the 2 biggest things. The 2 biggest things. Why did we change from that? Yeah. Why did we go to things like factoring and set builder notation in math rather than learning basic addition, basic subtraction? You need that in life. You need the basics. Right. But the more expansive, more inclusive things that go off into algebra and to statistics, they should be extracurricular things. Maybe you have to take something that like might get you interested. You get a dabble in it. You take like a quarter.
Yeah, I agree with that to a certain point. I agree because there should be part of this is a
should
buffet.
Be a balance.
There's a buffet. You need to take a little bit of each. So you need a little bit of biology because you need to know how your body works. Otherwise, you'll have coughing fits all the time because you don't know when you need water. You know, so I'm going to argue that you might need biology. No, but I hear what you're saying. I'm saying, but we need to get really granular with what fits in with that, and can we tie some of those in that make sense, that are more real world skills. I think what happens is in public education, you have so many other people deciding what happens,
it's difficult.
And when that happens, you're trying to compete on an economic level with the world, and you're saying, well, what are these other countries doing differently? And
it's a system.
And you're trying things out, and it's such a slow process. You know,
it's an extremely slow process. And I feel like a really big important thing is you don't get any of the students' perspective. You don't get
Right.
like what do students want, and there's some schools. We're not this school. We're a very well endowed public school, but there are schools that don't have art programs. They don't have music programs. Those should not be math, science, social studies should not be prioritized over art and music for people who want to do those things. Because
I think that makes sense.
because if you want to be a musician, you don't need to know all the other stuff, but you need that music part. And
Well,
you
that's the
can't-
same way like her class is saying, like you need to have those conversations about his soup cereal or whatever,
Right.
because for some kids that music and being able to play that instrument during lunch or after
Right.
school might be the reason they're there and will sit through biology, because then they'll get to that.
Right.
Well,
And
that is
maybe
another
that's
point.
You learn
the
more.
piece that's missing. That is, and I think that's something with Tech Pack and what we're trying to do here this year. My goal was to do like maker spaces so that kids on their free time can either be helping other kids out or playing with robotics and STEM,
Right.
or would love to have a recording studio for people who want to podcast or want to mix music, because that might be the reason to get them in the doors, and they'll deal with all of the other stuff. I'll eat my vegetables if I know there's mac and cheese on the plate.
Right,
You know
yeah.
what I mean?
It's something that needs to be brought up more and at a way higher pay grade than all three. of us
Well,
combined.
yeah. Well, here's the other thing too, and school change is slow. But like, for example, when you were in school, do you think that there's any major differences seeing a high school here versus
Right.
when you walked the halls of a high school?
Absolutely. And even like, okay, this is your 17th year. This is my third. Even probably in our certification programs in school, we've been taught differently. So like my whole thing, I wasn't taught any classroom behavior management techniques. I was told, have a relationship with your kids. That's what I was told.
And
For
some
a year.
were told not to smile till November.
And then some are told
Yeah.
not to smile until November, and that you have to
Is
be
that
so
seriously a
strict.
policy?
No, it's so
That's
serious.
a policy.
Well,
It's
no, I mean
real.
it's like it's
Oh.
one of the things that they joke
Right.
about, but like
Like don't let them
don't
right.
be
Keep
guarded.
them on a leash, basically.
Yeah.
So that they don't get too crazy. That's right.
We're
so
not animals.
Even right.
Well,
But
but
some
if
people can
they
handle
don't
this.
want you to take advantage, because then if they think you're too fun and too nice, then you'll not get
Right.
any work done.
That's
Well,
the
And so, but that
idea.
was a mantra that for whatever it
Right,
was
for a
years
long
ago, if you talk to any teacher who's been here and
Right.
hasn't been in a high school for 30, as a
That's
student for 30
horrible.
years, that was the mantra. It was.
It used to be just lecture.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's
No.
where education started.
You
Like
can't do that.
if you've seen the old movies where they all have to stand up and repeat after her, like that's what education was. And we have come to this spot at least to where I can safely do what I do in a classroom without it being frowned upon. You
Yeah.
know, like that would have been frowned upon before, the way I stylize my classroom.
I'm not going to deny that we've made progress, but we're not quite there yet.
Oh,
We're
agreed.
we're still in the point where we're still trying to memorize the dots instead of trying to connect the dots.
I agree with you.
Well, that's where we need to get. We need to get to the point where we're connecting dots, where we're applying what we're learning in
Yeah.
real world situations, not just here's the math problem, here's the Spanish word.
Right.
When did this? What happened on this date?
Right.
It should be why is this important?
That's why I've been using like an analogy of like we I think to that point we were for so long teachers felt like you were the kids in the high chairs and we're spoon feeding you,
Right.
when in reality we should all be sous chefs cooking our version of the course of the meal, and then we come and we sit down together and we enjoy it, and that's where it needs to be a collaborative effort, and that's where stuff like project and problem-based learning comes in, and can we fit that it gets messy, learning gets messy there, and it's not in that nice digestible box.
Yeah.
So for your teacher who's been here for 20 years that says, you know what, I only got 10 more years left, I think that drag
fair.
to the finish line for them is like the most painful. And I was hopeful that last year, and I think it was true, that a lot of teachers that I noticed in my role helping teachers, some of the teachers who had kids now in college were saying to themselves like, I need to change or I need to shift because I see my
Right.
kids struggling in college,
Yeah.
and am I doing the best service to these kids here? And it's hard to sometimes, go out of line and do some of those things when you've have your blankie and you're just used to what it feels like. You're used to what the third week of school feels like with kids,
Right.
and all of a sudden that blankie got yanked,
Yep.
and now do you go deal with it, or do you just stay in the fetal position crying for the next year and a half?
Right.
Some did that, some did both sides of that, and I get that.
Yeah. I'm not blaming those teachers because it was
Yeah.
a
Well,
really
sure.
it was a really hard year
Oh,
for
absolutely.
both students and teachers. Because there's never been anything like it.
Yeah.
No one has ever seen anything like that. So it was really tough for both people involved. So I feel like there
But
needs
some
to be
people flourished,
Some people
and some
flourished.
people just survived.
and survive.
So what would you guys say to a teacher out there now who feels like they're still struggling to figure out?
Talk to your kids. Do project-based learning. Take your test. Why do we still have multiple choice questions at all?
Yeah.
At this point anymore?
I feel the
Why
same.
do we have any vocabulary quizzes? Why is that even still a thing?
Yeah.
Why does our school still own a Scantron? I took a Scantron test yesterday. Why do we
That's
even still
wild.
own a Scantron?
Yeah.
Right.
Like, first of all, you can do a multiple choice test on the Chromebook. It's built in. You can do it in 100 different ways. And our school's paid for like 40 of them.
Yeah.
So why not use that instead of burning through trees, which is another thing. Oh, same teacher, by the way, burning through trees. We're cutting down forests. Why do we even still use paper? But take those multiple choice questions, take your test, make it into a project. Make us apply the information we're learning, because the information is important. People don't like social studies, but I think that it's really important, because if you don't learn that history, you're going to repeat it. And most of the history is not good. For most countries, it's filled with a lot of violence and fear, and it's not a good thing to repeat. But memorizing that thing and then throwing it up on the test and just forgetting it later is not what we need. It's not going to keep people from repeating it, because you're not going to remember what's happening. But if you're applying it, if you're making a video or a poster or a picture or something, you're making something, you're physically acting something out, whatever it is, whatever the project may be, you're going to remember it, because you're going to remember the amount of time you put into it, and you're going to remember getting up in front of the class and talking to them.
Yeah, and I think to that point, like, that's hard. Like, as a teacher, if I were hearing that, I'd say, like, yeah, that sounds great. How do I do that? I think is the
Right.
problem, because I think a lot of them, if they hadn't been through teacher programs in the last 5 years, then
It's
that
difficult.
wasn't something prioritized, and that can sit. My thing is, as someone who's been teaching that long, once I realized I could put more on the student, like I didn't, the once I created the project or had the idea of what I wanted them to do, then talk to the kids and have them set the parameters with you, so that we can all agree, like, how can you show me that you're learning? And I think if we start to have the relationships with our kids, we create those families, then we can make those projects. But if we think that there's rubrics and we got to have everything so granular, and then your average teacher has been teaching 25 years, the teacher who gave you that Scantron, their head just blew up. You know what I mean?
Right.
So how do we get, and that's the part where I come in, because I love being that instructional coach, so that I can kind of help those teachers where they are get to where they need to be, in the same way that teachers are supposed to meet you where you are and get you to where you need to be.
That's a thing that teachers need to do more. They need to ask for help more. They need to ask
right.
teachers who are doing things that they want
Right.
to do for help.
There's a huge issue with this imposter syndrome or fraud that I think a lot of anybody feels in their jobs, but I think teachers especially, because you're supposed to know the answers. When I was student teaching here, and I student taught here,
Okay.
so 17 years ago, I had a kid come up to me, his name was Kyle, and I was here early before school, and I was a student teacher in Latin, and he was in like Latin 3, and he came up and asked me a question about his homework that I wasn't doing that class. Mrs. Susadale was teaching that class, and I didn't know the answer. And I had a breakdown. Like, I had to walk around the school for 45 minutes. Susadale had to like calm me down and bring me back, because I had this feeling like I couldn't answer his question. Then what am I doing here? And I think that's such a real feeling. Like, you're supposed to be that sage on the stage. You're supposed to be the Wizard of Oz. And how dare you show them that there's a man or woman behind the curtain?
Which is a horrible
It does.
stigma.
But it feels
is.
like
But
that.
that's the real fear of, like, the same person that's claustrophobic.
Which is
Like,
horrible.
snap out of it. Okay.
I know, and it's horrible, because you have the teachers that don't ask questions, they don't know what to do, and they have that imposter syndrome. You don't always have to know the answer.
Yeah.
Because the answer is going to change. Most of the textbooks that we have that aren't just
Right.
bought are wrong.
Yeah, we had that the other day. We were
Most of
looking
them
at
are
a picture of the Coliseum, and they asked, like, when was it built? I was like, somebody opened a tab at Google and asked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was fine. That
The
was
information is constantly changing. Every single day, those textbooks get more wrong, to the point where you could not possibly keep all the information on everything in Latin that's ever happened and will happen in your head. You couldn't. It's not possible. The only place you could keep it
Dr.
on your
Howe,
computer.
though, he
Yeah,
says.
cool. So what would you say to a team, being as someone who knows, like,
Surely.
knowing that sometimes the way you step out of line, so to speak, what would you say to some of those teachers that maybe have a hard time stepping out of line?
I think the biggest thing is, and that's what I've been thinking about this whole time, is that like, yes, it is going to be scary. I think because changing anything or doing anything new is going to be scary. And there's like a constant fear that it will get out of control because you're trying something so different and so new. And I do, like, my catchphrase is we're pretty much operating on like one level under chaos. Any given moment, I'm pretty much like this close to chaos. And I like that,
That's fair.
but that's how I vibe. Some people aren't like that. So it is going to be scary stepping out. And it may feel foreign or chaotic or disorganized the first couple times. But what I would say is keep going, keep trying. And I think, I'm going to say it 100 times, getting to know your kids more and more, they will guide you to what they enjoy, like what sets them on fire. I say that a lot, like what sets you on fire? Like what has you passionate right now? What are you interested in? Because it's way more work. Right. It is way more work, I'm not gonna lie. Like to teach the way I do, it is way more work than finding a worksheet or making a worksheet and giving a worksheet. Or direct instructing for how many minutes and then giving a worksheet. It is way more work. And so all of those things combined are scary, but it's baby steps. And it's, I would also say, necessary steps.
Yeah.
Because soon it's going to get to the point where the old way is not going to work anymore.
Yeah.
Especially with just technology and Google and the way lives are now and the way the world is becoming in 2021, it's not going to work. So baby steps.
Yeah. So, so we hope you enjoyed the episode today. We thought it was very productive. It was a really great conversation. We're looking forward to our next couple episodes. We're going to have some like the school nurse on, some administrators, some teachers in other disciplines. So we hope you liked what you heard and saw, and, we hope to continue this conversation. Got anything to add?
Not really.
I like it. Thanks for joining our first episode.